Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling Media Power Number 2, so the second in the Media Power series. Corporate media tries to downplay, trivialize, manage Ohio train wreck. So, this is about the February 3rd derailment of a 150 car train, a Norfolk Southern train in East Palestine, Ohio, that had numerous toxic chemicals on it. There was a supposedly controlled explosion that was an attempt to and fire that was an attempt to manage the dispersal of these chemicals by Norfolk Southern. There was toxics that leaked into water, into ground. People and animals were experiencing signs of poisoning by, among others, vinyl chloride. That was one of the primary chemicals that were in this very long train. And so, since then, there's also been at least one other, I think there may be even two other train derailments in Ohio by Norfolk Southern trains. So the media, including mainstream, now this media power episode is about mainstream media. The first one was about the right-wing propaganda machine that it continues to yield lots of interesting insights lately in the last few weeks due to this lawsuit against Fox News. But this is about the corporate media, the supposedly more reliable media that generally is more fact-based than Fox News. In fact, almost much more fact-based, but not entirely fact-based. It is also a tool of managing our consciousness, literally, and our perception of reality in ways that are exploited by politicians of the right wing, that are where Fox News is supplying the propaganda for that. There's a sense of victimhood and injury because of what is reported and how it's reported in the mainstream media about them. But the world doesn't revolve around them. The world is a more complex thing. But the mainstream media also has biases and also is used as a tool of power. And this is the theme of this series. So anyway, so in this particular case, we had the mainstream media blocking or minimizing this accident and what it meant for Americans. Not only just this particular accident, we can hope that this accident will yield very few long-term toxic sequelae or impacts, consequences for the community of East Palestine and the surrounding areas. We can hope for that. But what this exposes is the long-term, the big issue that is being avoided by most media. And there's some notable exceptions, including the Lever, an investigative outfit headed by David Sirota, that has really been heroically in this case, or if not heroically is maybe the wrong word, but dutifully as journalists covering this issue and understanding that there's some big issues behind it. There's issues related to labor, issues related to sustainability and health, public health, and also a corporate malfeasance and government corruption, and our corrupted system of how we finance political campaigns, and also how a lot lobbyists and control or can control politicians or have power over them in ways that are unique for the United States, and or if certainly among developed countries. So what the East Palestine, just sort of to take a step back from the minutia or the different moves within the media management of this particular issue, I am going to sketch out what I think are the what they're trying to avoid, the big picture issues. The big picture issues are train lines run throughout the United States and through communities of all different political persuasions, and and all different ethnicities, and so and I'm referring to that in particular because this train, some of the political controversy around this are there's some racial issues that are being raised by the right-wing media and also by the right wing, where there's an effort to create a victimhood narrative that they have been drumming up for many years now. But taking a step back, all communities in the United States are threatened by, or not all, but many, 85% or 80% or are threatened by trains going through them with toxic and explosive chemical and fuels like fossil fuels and oil and through their communities. And trains also carry all kinds of other things. They carry food and cattle and goods from ports and so forth and so on. Anyway, we have an enormous freight rail system in the United States and a very, very small passenger rail system. And this is built on an ancient or set of tracks that are often a century old or more, and they are not really adequate for a society as large and as populous and as dynamic as the United States economy and the United States polity has become. They scrimp on. So the way the rails are the rail companies, the big six rail operators, how they operate is they're regional monopolies that try to wring out profit from this very, very old infrastructure. And they also, among other things, do stock buybacks. So they attempt to boost their stock prices by cutting costs. Norfolk Southern has done this, and they are so they're scrimping on things that matter to workers, that matters to communities around the country, and in the interests of creating wealth for mostly very few people, the owners of the stockholders, the shareholders of these companies, and at the expense of the communities and the workers. Okay. And also at the expense of the environment and of our future. So now, relatively speaking, rail transport is more energy efficient than truck transport and plane transport or logistics via air transport. So if there is a good story to tell about that in terms of our relative, given the current state of our infrastructure. But really, the infrastructure would need to be expanded to incorporate rail to be both safer and also to rail passengers. So to be able to do more rail passenger traffic and also freight traffic in a safer way, in a smoother way, in a way that would avoid derailments and accidents and so forth and so on. So all of this would require trillions of dollars of investment, which these companies do not want to do and they cannot do really. And it involves it's not within their mandate even to do these things. It's not their job in a way, and so this requires nationalization. So nationalization is something that is on the table, in not is not on the table, but it's being suggested by some rail unions and so forth and so on, and some people like me who have been advocating for a revive or a expansion of our rail system, including high-speed rail, passenger rail, for sustainability reasons, for reasons of avoiding air traffic and also driving the car around unnecessarily. In other words, being able to avoid some of the passenger truck and car traffic we see on interstates and so forth and so on, and enabling people to have the kind of experience that people have in Europe and in Japan and China now, to go to travel very, very fast via high-speed rail to faraway places, and there either use whatever conveyance that they can rent a car, they can maybe the public transit there. We can also invest in that, and that would be part of a large expanded Green New Deal that we would need to implement and both propose and implement. So, and that involves also managing how you run the rails through various towns, and whether you run the rails around the town versus run it through the town. So, in my opinion, this requires a multi-million-dollar engineering study or competing engineering studies. To actually, I would like to see 2 or more engineering studies, as if I were, in advisory position in Congress and so forth and so on, and where we were designing the Green New Deal that we need. And I would want engineering studies, which is what engineering companies do, to figure out, what are the impacts, the real impacts on communities of running the rails, either both renovating existing rails and then running new sets of rails around or through towns. And so, there is both in Europe and the United States, modern train stations are also located not necessarily in the middle of towns. While this is not, ideal from the point of, the structure of the local town, you can also understand, because you want the train station at the civic center, so to speak, in some kind of ideal urbanist dream. In terms of the reality, sometimes they are at some place toward the side of the town, and in some modern setups where rails have been built in the last 3-4 decades, or new sets of like high-speed rail and other so in order not to disrupt the center of towns, which have been built around rails, but they've been built around this old set of rails that would need to be updated and be enlarged, and there's not a lot of room to enlarge them in some towns, many towns. So anyway, this requires a visionary, relatively speaking. I'm not using visionary in a way that is supposed to be a grandiose vision, but I mean, it is a big project, so it does tend toward the big. But anyway, it requires vision. It requires seeing ahead into the future and seeing what we have to do, and also figuring out how much rail do we need in a reasonable way and what are steps, and how can we do it in a stepwise manner where we can take advantage of step 1 or step 2 sooner, because this kind of thing will take years to build. So anyway, and we want to build it in a way that is where it's built in a way that's fairly quick, but also not scrimping on safety and on the preservation of some, or there will be some properties that are that are bought because basically they need to be run. The train will need to be run through some property that may be owned by some private owner, and they'd be paid for their property, so forth and so on. but that will create some disturbance for some people. But there needs to be an overall vision where people can buy into it, or not, but at least can dispute it, but at least acknowledge that it's not just the profit motive of some greedy individual that is causing this building project, but a vision for the United States. So this is where, we're getting into looking at, well, how is the United States structured now? And now it's structured in a way where the value of human life is valued at a lower level than we want. Okay, we want to not in dollar. I'm not wanting to create a dollar figure for this. It's an ethical choice to not endanger people and to create the infrastructure we need to create a safe environment, to create a climate stable environment, and also create ways to enhance people's lives by enabling them to travel farther away, or visit family, or whatever it is they want to do, without necessarily hopping into a 4,000 or 5,000 pound vehicle, which will, in the next 10 years, still often be powered by oil, and we would hope that soon that will not be the case. But in terms of their powering, the power train of those vehicles, but still, rail provides a good option for many people, or could provide a good option for many people. So, but right now, the rails in the United States are not functioning well for passengers. Anyway, except for in very few commuter suburbs, mostly in the East Coast of the United States. But anyway, the getting to the media. So what I'm talking about is all outside the framework of what we call the Overton window. But it looms out there, and there is this, I would say, people intuit that there's something, if we open up this can of worms of rail and how rail is owned and how rail is managed and what we will do with rail in the future, that they have the sense that, this is going to create a more demand for change, and that's something we elites, the elite, I'm talking about the elite media operatives, the elite politicians, the owners, the ruling class, the donor class, the billionaire class, do not want to open up. They don't want to change the physical infrastructure of these remote places, or for that matter, throughout the United States, because that would involve a huge public project, and that would involve a different kind of government involvement in the economy, which is not something that the billionaire class, the ruling class in the United States, does not want to endeavor. They do not want to. I mean, maybe there are a few exceptions in that group, but they are, as a whole, they're not interested in that, and they are, as a whole, they have a strong grip on both the media and also the two major political parties. So anyway, so what the media is doing then, so avoiding this, and also even in, I would say, the lever, in doing its investigative reporting about the accident in East Palestine, it's not really up to them to talk, as I have, about this vision or a visionary view of both rail safety and rail expansion and rail ownership, though that is being brought to the table by unions. They could report on that. So good investigative reporting, which the lever is modeling for the corporate media, in which the corporate media is resisting in general, and not, or let's say they're only begrudgingly letting this issue into their air and into their print and so forth and so on, is that they are trying to protect the corporate parties, the Democrats and Republicans. So Mike DeWine, the Republican governor of Ohio, has received or is interested in getting donations and also various projects going with Norfolk Southern. He doesn't want to disturb Norfolk Southern, and so he has minimized this. He hasn't called for FEMA to come in to help out with this rail disaster in East Palestine, and also Joe Biden is not, and Pete Buttigieg are not jumping out of the. So Pete Buttigieg, in the beginning, was saying he really didn't have anything to do here. There was nothing. He talked about, he made some pronouncements that are quite, beside the point, and were dodging the idea that in fact that he was the chief regulator of transportation and rail in the United States, and he's the Secretary of Transportation, and he eventually has been shamed, has been pressured by not only the lever, but also by the right-wing media that have picked up some of the lever's reporting. And the lever has a good piece, which I think I put a link. Maybe you can see the beginning of it. You need to subscribe to the lever to see this whole piece. It's not too long, but anyway, they discuss how that there's this way in which the right wing and left wing, or not left wing, centrist media are they do a dance, so to speak, or that they attempt to. In this case, they were trying to block and protect mostly Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg in the beginning from any negative consequences, and Norfolk Southern. So corporation, and also Mike DeWine. So anyway, those people now in government. So Republican governor of Ohio, considered to be quote unquote moderate Republican, and also but is really a corporate Republican as well. I mean, they're almost all corporate Republicans, and Pete Buttigieg, a big corporate Democrat, and also Joe Biden, also a corporate Democrat. They were trying to block and not make a scandal out of the East Palestine derailment, and just simply by, if they had done as the lever does to constantly, to go to on site to say, what's going on, to make to continue to cover this story, it could become a huge scandal because of all of the communities around the United States that have rail going through them, freight trains going through them, where they do not have control over. They rely on government to protect them by regulating the rails. Okay, and if the government is not protecting them, and the classification of train, Obama, though he suggested or some changes to rail regulation, and there was some new proposals put out, they didn't decisively re-regulate the rails, or there were some weaker regulation they put in. Trump, when he was in office, he removed those regulations. There are still some regulations to rail, but they're weak, and there's, for instance, a braking system that would cost a few $1 billion to implement on the trains in the United States, and it's a no-brainer kind of thing, because the current braking systems date from just after the Civil War, so they're over 150 years old, and so not, the technology is, and probably often the actual calipers and so forth and so on are maybe decades old as well. But anyway, there would be an electronic, similar to what cars have now, an electronic braking system implemented on these cars. So you can imagine it requires retrofitting many hundreds of thousands of rail cars, and so and that costs money. And anyway, the rail companies were sort of talking about this as a great future of rail braking during the Obama years, but when actually there was proposed that it might be required, they said they were resisting it. They do not want to be required to put in this electronic braking system. And so the media has not been a forceful voice for this, and it certainly has allowed Buttigieg to define his role as first a non-regulator and now a very hesitant regulator. On this 22nd, I'll put a link in the description to this piece in the Lever that Buttigieg, after about 2.5 weeks, basically agreed that he needed to do some different regulating. But it's clear that he's being dragged against his will, because he's a veteran of McKinsey. He's a corporate Democrat par excellence. I mean, there are many corporate Democrats. I mean, there are also many corporate Republicans, DeWine, so forth and so on. And even those who pose to be populist are also corporate. I mean, so anyway, so Trump actually also went to East Palestine. So there is also on the right wing, in that right wing media sphere, there is a attempt to make this part of the idea that the Biden administration is racist against the mostly white people who live in East Palestine, and that's why he hasn't visited, or he hasn't gone. So the media has also created this, both in the centrist media and in the right-wing media. They've created this drama where if you visit East Palestine, you're showing you care about it, but it's avoiding defining the political response as being whether you visit or not, whether you show you care. So Trump did this already. He went into McDonald's. He offered to pay for the firefighters, or he did pay for some firefighters and police for lunch or whatever it is at this McDonald's. He brought some water with him because the water had been contaminated there. It was if you looked at it, it's a very awkward spectacle. But nevertheless, Trump is a dangerous foe for corporate Democrats and also corporate Republicans, because he knows how to play a populist. He knows, and he is free to do that. He is so interested in, among other things, because he is potentially facing jail, in reattaining power, or also just smearing the current Democratic administration and also his opponents on his side in the Republican press. And also he's very, very interested in, he has an existential need to retain power for himself, but he knows he needs to play. He's smart enough as a politician to know that he needs to play the man of the people, and that's something that Pete Buttigieg can never do, or he doesn't do it well. Let's say maybe he can retrain himself, and I don't know. But and Joe Biden has a little bit more of a gift in this area of playing regular Joe, but he is. His politics and his efforts in this area are very weak. Also, as represented by Buttigieg being his Secretary of Transportation. There's not a lot of pressure on him. I mean, there is some. I think he's getting some pressure from Biden. I think Biden, he doesn't feel able to maybe pressure Buttigieg as much as he might, or whatever reason. He also is on the side of Norfolk Southern in a number of issues. So and he's also generally for the railways, where he settled the rail strike in favor of the railways and not in favor of the workers before this accident occurred in late last year. So, um, so we see in the way that the media slow walked this and tried to keep this out of the spotlight, and then when it is in the spotlight, they're trying to create a pageantry around it that avoids the concrete issues that will either change or not change people's safety and the safety of the rail workers and the obviously environmental risks associated with rail transport, and they're wanting to keep it on a superficial level, and also a he said or he said she said between the two parties about who goes there and who doesn't, and because intuiting or maybe even consciously aware of if they open this can of worms and they will need to be covering rail safety more seriously and endangering a whole industry, not the industry, but the corporate structure of that industry and the stock market interests, the Wall Street interests that want to keep this industry and also other industries cutting costs and doing stock buybacks to boost asset prices and keeping the show going, rather than creating real infrastructure that we need, either mostly via government action, via a really substantial Green New Deal, a really ambitious and either the middle level Green New Deal, or an ambitious and visionary Green New Deal. They want to avoid that. They want to keep that out of the spotlight. And so this is why the management of this issue is so important to me, or observing it is so important to me, and why the media know or intuit that it is important for them to protect Norfolk Southern and Mike DeWine and Buttigieg, and also or when they do cover it, to keep it on the level of Trump's showmanship and the sort of superficiality of the pageantry of leaders going or not going to this town, and to try to keep it confined in a way where, rather than seriously discussing this and then also being forced to cover it, and then political leaders then having to really respond to it. And I think that there is some change afoot. So I'm slightly optimistic about, and it seems like the lever is slightly optimistic about this as well, that this effort to manage it is it's still going to be managed. But that it is not going the way exactly that the corporate media wanted it to go. So the media is not all powerful. We see that Fox is not all powerful, and we also see that corporate media is not all powerful. They can steer and they can attempt to, but they don't dictate exactly how the outcomes are going to occur, and they really should be just observing, reporting, informing the public, and letting and embarrassing politicians in a way that serves public interest and their readers' interest or their viewers' interest. But that's not how they've been operating overall. So anyway, let me stop here, and please share your thoughts in comments, and maybe we can discuss if you have any. There's a lot of detail to this story. I'll try to put links in the description where you can find more detailed information about this particular story. But this is an example story of what I think is a huge issue about climate action sustainability, environmental justice, all these very big issues, and also corporate regulation, government action, all these things. Anyway, look forward to seeing you in the next video, and also please subscribe to Politics 2100. Thanks.